The courtroom was tense. The air felt thick with anticipation as the crowd shifted uneasily in their seats. At the center of the room stood Pam Bondi, the current U.S. Attorney General, her piercing eyes scanning the courtroom as her heels clicked firmly on the polished floor. Clad in a sharp black suit, she exuded power and confidence. Her reputation for decisiveness and an unshakable demeanor was well known in Washington, D.C., but today she wasn't in her usual element. Facing her across the courtroom, however, was Judge Samuel Rockwell, a man whose corruption had been whispered about for years but had never been brought to light. His thick glasses and bald head only added to the air of authority he tried to maintain, though it was clear from his smirk that he enjoyed the power he held in this particular case. Pam Bondi wasn't just here for any regular trial. She had been assigned to prosecute a series of high-profile cases involving a corrupt network of judges and politicians. This case was a huge one, and Judge Rockwell was at the center of it all. The allegations were damning: bribery, misconduct, and the manipulation of legal proceedings to serve the interests of powerful donors. Ms. Bondi, Judge Rockwell's voice rang out, laced with a thinly veiled sarcasm. "I trust you're not here to lecture us on the obvious, are you? We all know what you're about. Just remember, I've been in this game longer than you've been in politics." Pam's lips tightened, but she didn't flinch. "I'm here to make sure justice is served, Judge." "Something you might not be as familiar with as you think," she replied, her voice calm but with an edge that sent a shiver down the spine of everyone in the room. The courtroom gasped at her words. Judge Rockwell's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure, brushing off the remark with a wave of his hand. "You're a prosecutor, Pam? Stick to the facts, not the theatrics," he sneered. "We both know you're just trying to make a name for yourself with this little stunt." Pam's eyes narrowed. She had been in many confrontations in her career, but there was something about Judge Rockwell that grated on her nerves. Maybe it was the smug look on his face, or maybe it was the deep-rooted sense of entitlement he carried like a badge of honor. But what really stuck with her was the unspoken truth that his influence had gone unchecked for far too long. The judge motioned for her to proceed, clearly eager to get this over with. As Pam stepped forward, she felt the weight of the eyes on her: lawyers, reporters, spectators, everyone was watching. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Her reputation, the reputation of her office, and the very idea of justice in this case hung by a thread. "Your Honor," Pam began, her voice unwavering, "we are here today to expose a system of corruption that has allowed judges like you to manipulate the law for personal gain. You've taken bribes, tampered with evidence, and hidden behind your robe for far too long. Your empire of deceit is crumbling, and I'm here to make sure you face the consequences." The silence in the room was deafening. Judge Rockwell's face flushed a deep shade of crimson. The man who had once wielded the law as his own personal weapon now found himself on the receiving end of Pam's righteous fury. "You dare accuse me of corruption?" Rockwell hissed, his voice low and menacing. "I've been a judge for over 30 years. You don't get to come into my courtroom and make such baseless accusations." Pam didn't back down. "Oh, I believe it's more than baseless. It's a fact. And today we're going to prove it." The crowd in the courtroom leaned forward in anticipation. The tension was palpable and everyone could feel that something big was about to happen. But as Pam continued to present her case, the judge's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would mutter under his breath, make rude comments, and occasionally even interrupt her, his thin veneer of professionalism slipping further with each passing minute. It was as though he could feel his grip on power loosening, and it made him desperate. Pam Bondi could see it in his eyes: fear. Fear that his corrupt empire was on the brink of collapse. Fear that the truth was finally catching up with him. The minutes ticked by and the once unflappable judge was starting to crack. The evidence Pam presented, each accusation, each revelation of his bribery and misconduct, hit harder than the last. Then it happened. In a moment of pure frustration, Judge Rockwell snapped. "Enough," he roared, slamming his gavel down so hard that it echoed through the courtroom. "I won't tolerate this any longer. You're out of line, Ms. Bondi." Pam's response was swift, but there was no anger in her voice, only the calm assurance of someone who knew they were on the right side of history. "You've had enough time, Judge. Time to face the truth," she said, her words cutting through the air like a knife. For a brief moment, the courtroom went completely silent. Even Judge Rockwell seemed to realize that the end was near. But it wasn't just his career that was at stake, it was something much larger than that. The case against him was much stronger than anyone had anticipated. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the people who had been complicit in his corruption were turning on him one by one. His empire was crumbling. And he knew it. Judge Rockwell's face turned an unhealthy shade of pale as the realization sank in. His reputation was in ruins, his decades-long influence teetering on the edge of destruction. Pam Bondi stood there, unshaken, the picture of resolve as she continued to lay bare his corruption piece by piece. For years, Rockwell had manipulated the system, using his power in the court to protect his own interests and those of his powerful allies. It had worked until now. Pam was the unrelenting force he could not control. The more she spoke, the more the walls of his empire closed in. The judge struggled to regain his composure, fumbling with his gavel in an attempt to look authoritative. But there was no saving face now. Not after Pam had exposed the depth of his criminal dealings. Your Honor, Pam continued, her voice unwavering, you've been a puppet master, pulling strings from behind the scenes, ensuring that the law worked in your favor. But today you're the one who's being pulled. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. No one could believe what was unfolding in front of their eyes. Here was a man who had once held absolute power in this very room, now reduced to nothing more than a scared, cornered animal. Rockwell, desperate to hold on to any shred of dignity, finally spoke, his voice trembling. I've been in this position for decades. I know what I'm doing. You have no right. No right? Pam interrupted, her voice growing louder, cutting through the judge's protestations. I have every right. It's called justice. And it's time to make sure you're held accountable for your actions. Your time is up, Judge Rockwell. The judge's eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, to save him from the inevitable collapse of his empire. His once loyal associates were no longer in the courtroom. The people who had helped him manipulate the system were now facing investigations of their own. The strength of his connections had all but vanished. You think you can just take me down like this? Rockwell spat, his face twisted in anger. You're nothing compared to the power I've built. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Pam shook her head, her expression one of pity. No, Judge. You've underestimated me. And you've underestimated the people who are finally ready to stand up to you. For a brief moment, Rockwell looked as though he might lash out physically, but he caught himself. The gavel slammed down once more, but it was weaker this time, a sign of his faltering authority. I order you to stop this at once, he barked, his eyes wild with desperation. Pam didn't flinch. You can order all you want, Judge. But the truth doesn't obey orders. As she spoke, the doors to the courtroom opened and several law enforcement officers entered. They had been waiting for the signal, and now it was time. Pam's team had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, collecting evidence, securing testimonies, and building the case that would bring Judge Rockwell down. The officers approached the judge, who recoiled, his face going pale as he realized what was happening. His world, the world he had so carefully constructed, was crumbling in front of him. You're under arrest, one of the officers said flatly, his voice devoid of sympathy. For bribery, misconduct, and obstruction of justice. The room went silent as Judge Rockwell stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had fought for so long to remain untouchable. But now, the truth had finally caught up to him. His corrupt empire, built on manipulation and deceit, was no more. I don't deserve this, he stammered, taking a step back as if trying to escape. You deserve everything that's coming to you, Pam said coldly. Her words were not filled with triumph, but with the satisfaction of seeing justice prevail. The officers moved quickly, handcuffing the judge and escorting him out of the courtroom. Pam watched the scene unfold, her expression stoic, but inside she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about ensuring that the law was upheld, no matter how powerful the person standing before it was. As the judge was led away, the spectators in the courtroom erupted into a mixture of applause and murmurs. Some were shocked, others relieved. But no one was indifferent. Pam Bondi had just taken down one of the most powerful figures in the legal system. As the room began to clear out, Pam made her way back to her seat, her mind already shifting to the next steps. There was still much work to be done. The web of corruption that had been spun over the years was vast, and the ramifications of Rockwell's downfall would spread far beyond this courtroom. But for now, Pam allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. She had done what she came here to do. And in doing so, she had sent a message that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law. The following days after Judge Rockwell's arrest were a whirlwind. News outlets across the country picked up the story, reporting on the dramatic courtroom scene that had played out with Pam Bondi at the center. Rockwell's arrest was nothing short of a bombshell, but what came next was even more shocking, the sheer scale of the corruption network that had supported him. Pam had known all along that this was bigger than just one judge. Rockwell was merely the face of an intricate system that had been allowing corrupt officials to work in tandem, using their power to manipulate cases, shift public opinion, and line their pockets with illicit funds. The arrest was just the beginning. In the days that followed, Pam and her team worked tirelessly, sifting through mountains of evidence. Rockwell had kept detailed records, thinking his empire would never fall. But those records were now an open window into a world of criminal activity. Evidence of bribes, illicit deals, and backroom negotiations began to surface, implicating not only Rockwell but several other judges, politicians, and even high-profile businessmen who had benefited from the system he built. Pam stood in her office one morning, staring at the piles of documents that had just arrived. It was an avalanche of information, each paper revealing more about the empire Rockwell had crafted. As she flipped through the files, one name kept coming up: Senator Charles Granger. A powerful politician with ties to several major industries, Granger had been one of the most vocal supporters of Judge Rockwell. "Looks like the web just got bigger," Pam muttered to herself. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from one of her top investigators. "We've got Granger. We just found a trail linking him directly to the bribes Rockwell was taking. The senator's office has been compromised. We've got more leverage than we thought." Pam's heart raced. Granger was one of the most influential senators in Washington. His involvement in Rockwell's schemes meant that the corruption extended all the way to the highest levels of government. If they could get Granger to cooperate, they could expose even more people and bring the entire network to its knees. "We need to move fast," Pam replied. "Get me a meeting with Granger's team. We're going to play this carefully." But even as she plotted the next steps, Pam knew that the fight was far from over. Senator Granger was just one piece of the puzzle. There were more players involved, more judges, more politicians, and even more business tycoons who had profited from the corruption. And with each passing day, the pressure on Pam grew. Rockwell's downfall had shaken the system to its core, and now everyone was scrambling to cover their tracks. Pam had to be prepared for retaliation. She had already received several veiled threats, phone calls warning her to back off. But she wouldn't be intimidated. "I didn't come this far to let it all fall apart," she said to herself as she closed the files and turned to face the growing pile of work on her desk. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the Capitol, Senator Granger was preparing for a storm. He had heard the rumors about his involvement with Judge Rockwell and the growing investigations into the corruption scandal. Granger wasn't the type to panic easily. He had survived countless political battles, but this was different. This wasn't just a scandal, this was an existential threat to his career, his fortune, and his power. Granger sat in his office, staring out the window at the bustling city below. He knew what Pam Bondi was capable of, and he knew that if she was coming for him, she wouldn't stop until she had everything. He had already reached out to his allies in Washington, but even they were starting to back away. The public was beginning to turn and the pressure was mounting. His only option was to fight back. "Get me everything you have on Bondi," Granger barked to his assistant, a nervous young man standing at the door. "I want to know her every move, every ally, every weakness. We're not going down without a fight." Back at her office, Pam's phone rang again. This time it was a different call, a call that made her skin crawl. "Ms. Bondi," the voice on the other end was cold, calculated. "We know what you're trying to do. We have resources you can't even begin to understand. If you keep pushing, you'll regret it." Pam felt a chill run down her spine. The voice was familiar, but it was hard to place. It sounded like someone in the higher echelons of power, someone with enough pull to do real damage. She gripped the phone tightly, her resolve hardening. "I'm not scared of your threats," Pam replied, her voice steady. "You can try all you want to intimidate me, but I won't back down. I'm going to see this through to the end. Your empire is already crumbling. It's only a matter of time before everyone sees the truth." The line went dead. Pam sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. The call had rattled her, but she wasn't going to let it derail her. She had come too far, and the case was stronger than ever. The more they exposed, the more the walls around the corrupt network crumbled. But Pam knew that the fight was far from over. The people behind this corruption wouldn't go down easily, they would fight back, and they would fight dirty. But Pam was ready. She wasn't just fighting for justice, she was fighting for a future where the people who had abused their power were held accountable. The stakes were higher than ever, and she wasn't going to let anything stop her. As the investigation into the corruption scandal deepened, the pressure on Pam Bondi intensified. Senator Granger was not the only player left in the game. In the coming weeks, more names began to surface, names that reached across the political spectrum and into the highest corners of corporate America. The web was sprawling, and every thread seemed to pull Pam deeper into a labyrinth of deceit and power. But despite the growing complexity, Pam remained focused. She knew this battle wasn't just about taking down a corrupt judge or a politician. This was about sending a message that the days of unchecked corruption were over and no one was untouchable. One late evening, as Pam sat alone in her office reviewing the latest set of documents, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert from a local station. Breaking news, Senator Charles Granger linked to Judge Rockwell's corruption scandal, multiple investigations underway. Pam's heart skipped a beat. The story was now public and Granger would have no choice but to respond. This was the tipping point she had been waiting for, the moment when everything started to unravel for those involved. Granger had no way of stopping the flow of information and the pressure on him would only mount from here. As Pam read the article, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Granger had been the linchpin, the person who had kept Rockwell's empire running smoothly. His exposure meant that the entire foundation of corruption was crumbling. But Pam knew the true fight was about to begin. Granger wouldn't go down without a fight, and his allies would pull every trick in the book to discredit her and derail the investigation. The backlash was inevitable and she had to prepare for it. The following morning, Pam was summoned to a meeting with her team. As she walked into the conference room, she saw the grim faces of her closest allies. The situation was escalating faster than they had anticipated. "We've got intel that Granger's people are already launching a counteroffensive," one of her senior investigators, Sarah, said, spreading a stack of documents across the table. "They're planning to attack your credibility, accusing you of political bias, and even trying to tie you to some of the other investigations we've been working on." Pam sat down, her mind racing. She had expected this, but now it was real. Granger was already playing the game of public perception, attempting to turn the tables and create doubt about her integrity. He was going to use every ounce of his power to try and discredit her. "I'm not worried about his smear campaign," Pam said, her voice calm but firm. "But we need to make sure we're prepared for everything. We need to stay one step ahead of him and his allies." Sarah nodded. "We've already got a team working on responding to the public attacks. But we need to hit them where it hurts. We've got a few more documents that tie Granger directly to some illegal offshore accounts. If we can make that public, it'll be a game changer." Pam's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then we need to get those documents into the right hands, fast. We're not just playing defense here. We're going on offense." As the investigation pressed on, Pam's team continued to gather evidence. The documents on Granger's offshore accounts were only the tip of the iceberg. The deeper they dug, the more they found: illegal campaign contributions, bribery scandals, and even ties to international money laundering schemes. Granger's political career was built on corruption, and now it was all coming to light. But while Pam's team was uncovering new leads, Granger and his allies were working tirelessly to protect their own. The political landscape was shifting, and even Pam's closest supporters were beginning to feel the pressure. Rumors of influence from corporate donors, whispers of deals being made behind closed doors, it was all part of the game. Pam knew that the fight had moved beyond just the courtroom. It had become a battle for public opinion, a battle to control the narrative. If she wanted to ensure that Granger and his allies were brought to justice, she had to be strategic. Meanwhile, Senator Granger was working his own angles. He knew that Pam Bondi was relentless, but he had resources and connections that she could only dream of. The media was on his side, at least for now. His allies in the Senate were already circling the wagons, preparing to defend him in the public eye. But even as Granger mounted his defense, the walls around him were closing in. A report had just been leaked to the press. Senator Granger's offshore accounts exposed, multiple investigations underway in Europe and the United States. The story spread like wildfire, and soon, Granger was facing the same kind of public backlash that had once been reserved for Judge Rockwell. Granger called a meeting with his legal team, his face taut with frustration. "We need to stop this. Now. If they connect these offshore accounts to my campaign funds, it's over. I'll never survive the fallout." "Don't worry, Senator," his lead attorney reassured him. "We're already preparing a statement. We'll spin this as a misunderstanding, a simple clerical error. We'll blame the people who set up the accounts for you, and we'll make sure the media knows this is all an attack on your reputation." Granger nodded, but knew it wasn't enough. The truth was out, and no matter how hard he tried to control the narrative, it was slipping through his fingers. The scandal was bigger than he could manage, and the damage was already done. Back in Pam's office, the pressure was mounting, but so was the momentum. She had just received another piece of key evidence: a recorded conversation between Granger and one of Rockwell's former associates. The senator had been involved in orchestrating the very bribes that had allowed Rockwell to stay in power for so long. The conversation was damning. Pam reviewed the recording, her heart racing with anticipation. This was the breakthrough they needed. She was about to take the fight to the next level. "We're going to end this, once and for all," she said to her team, determination hardening her voice. Granger's time is up. The story was approaching its climax, with the walls closing in on both Pam's enemies and herself. The fight for justice was about to reach a fever pitch. Would Pam succeed in taking down the corrupt empire, or would her enemies use their last-ditch efforts to ruin her? The days leading up to the final court hearings were filled with tension. Both Pam and her enemies knew that the stakes had never been higher. The exposure of the corruption network had ignited a firestorm, and now, with Granger's involvement revealed, the pressure on Pam to deliver justice was overwhelming. But as the case approached its peak, Pam found herself facing new obstacles. This time, not from the corrupt empire she was trying to dismantle, but from within her own ranks. Pam's legal team had grown divided. Some members had begun to buckle under the pressure, feeling the weight of the investigation bearing down on them. They were being targeted, threatened, and dragged into public scandals themselves. Some had begun to question whether they could win, fearing the might of the political forces backing Granger and his associates. Pam had worked tirelessly to keep her team focused, but now, cracks were beginning to show. One evening, as Pam was reviewing the final documents before the hearing, she received a call from her trusted advisor, Tom. "Pam, I think we need to talk." Tom's voice was grim. "There's been a leak. Someone from inside your team gave Granger's people sensitive information. They're already using it against us. This thing might not go the way we planned." Pam's heart sank. A leak? She couldn't afford a single mistake now. Not after everything she had fought for. "I'll handle it, Tom. Make sure we keep everything else under wraps," Pam replied, trying to suppress the growing anxiety. She was now not just fighting Granger and his empire, but also the threat of betrayal from within. Whoever had leaked the information had just handed her enemies the ammunition they needed to fight back. With renewed determination, Pam spent the night ensuring that her team was on the right track, sifting through every last piece of evidence to ensure that nothing would be used against them. As the morning of the hearing arrived, she walked into the courtroom with the weight of the world on her shoulders. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back rows, cameras flashing as they captured every moment of the high-profile hearing. In the front, a sea of lawyers and politicians, some familiar faces, others new, filled the seats, all waiting to see how this legal battle would unfold. Pam's gaze flickered toward Granger's corner, where his legal team was seated stone-faced and calm. He was ready for the fight. Pam, however, wasn't intimidated. She took her place at the front, her focus clear, her resolve unshakable. The hearing began with the formalities, but soon it became apparent that this was no ordinary case. The attorneys representing Granger tried to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the evidence Pam had uncovered. They questioned every document, every testimony, attempting to paint Pam as an overzealous prosecutor driven by political bias. They even tried to accuse her of overstepping her authority, claiming that the charges against Granger were based on flimsy assumptions. But Pam had prepared for this. She had anticipated every attack, and she knew that the truth was on her side. She rose to speak, her voice clear and authoritative, and in that moment, the entire courtroom fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her eyes scanning the room. "What we have here is not just a case of one man's corruption. This is a systemic failure that has plagued our government, our courts, and our society. Senator Granger is not just another politician. He's the embodiment of a broken system, one that uses power to exploit the very people it is meant to serve." The room was still. Pam's words hit hard, and she could feel the weight of them. She continued, presenting the damning evidence: Granger's offshore accounts, the recorded conversation with Rockwell, the documents detailing his bribe payments. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin, and as she laid it out, she saw Granger's face change. The smug confidence was fading. His empire was crumbling before him. But it wasn't just the evidence that was shaking Granger's foundation. It was Pam herself. She wasn't just a prosecutor, she was a symbol of resilience and justice. She wasn't going to back down no matter how hard they tried to discredit her. And that, more than anything, was what Granger feared. The defense tried to counter by discrediting Pam's motives, claiming that she was using the case as a stepping stone for her own political gain. But Pam wasn't having it. She knew the truth. This wasn't about politics. It was about cleaning up the mess that people like Granger had made. As the hearing drew to a close, it was clear that the tide had turned. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. The people Granger had relied on to protect him, the powerful corporations, the hidden allies in the media, were beginning to lose their grip. Granger was on the ropes, and he knew it. Pam's final statement was short but powerful. Senator Granger and the people who enabled him may have thought they were untouchable. But today, the truth has caught up with them. The system may be broken, but together we will fix it. The gavel struck. The courtroom was silent. In the days following the hearing, everything changed. Senator Granger's downfall was swift. The media, once his ally, turned on him. His offshore accounts became the subject of widespread investigations, and within weeks he was under formal indictment. His political career was over. The shockwaves of his arrest reverberated through Washington, leaving a vacuum of power that others quickly rushed to fill. Pam, however, was not interested in the headlines. She had done what she set out to do, bring down a corrupt empire. But as the dust settled, she knew that her work was far from over. There were still more battles to fight, more corruption to expose, and more people to hold accountable. For now, though, Pam took a moment to breathe. She had won. Justice had prevailed. The empire that Judge Rockwell had helped build had crumbled, and with it, a new chapter in American politics was beginning, one where corruption no longer had a place to hide.